My name is Aaron Weiss. I play in the band Mewithoutyou, and this is Zero Platoon. I've been a part of the songwriting, the music writing process with the band, only in a kind of a suggestion and nudging in different directions kind of a manner. So I've mostly been responsible for the words. I was a drummer in a band. I wanted to get up and move around more. Starting to do vocals was really just born out of a desire to dance on stage. And then I just needed to write words to facilitate that. Right now, when I look back at some of the lyrics from our songs written 8 years ago, I think some of them are more true to who I am than some of what I've written on the latest album. I can say that there are words on our first couple albums that mean more to me today than some of those lyrics on our latest one. After our third album, that album begins and ends with the lyric, "I do not exist." That to me was like the culmination of like my deepest spiritual wrestling and pursuit. Like that's still to me the kind of pinnacle of where I sort of said the deepest sense of like my conviction or my intention or my hopes for my own sense of identity. And anything I've written since then has just been like an elaboration on that, or a way to kind of try to show a different facet of that. I no longer would present what I'm saying as this harbinger of truth. You know, nobody, for example, asks my brother what he means by a given guitar riff that he plays for the band. But the question of meaning is so tied up with language that it's almost impossible to listen to a song and not ask yourself, well, what does that mean? What does he mean by that? What does she mean by that? I think it is possible at the same time to disentangle language from meaning and to use it in such a way that just honors its rhythmic quality, for example, without presuming at all, I should say, that I'm communicating anything of universal value. I could tell you what it called to mind at the time that I wrote. I could try to tell you what it means to me at the moment, but I can't tell you what it means because I don't even know if it means anything. It would be very disappointing if I would set up this whole endeavor as I'm serving God, but it turns out I was serving myself and just trying to show off, you know. Whereas if I just say, well, I don't know what this is, I know that I like my job, I enjoy what we're doing, and I'm grateful to do it, and part of my role in that whole machinery necessitates putting words together. And a lot of those words have meaning to me, and there's especially those sequences of words, but not all of them. I want to set my standards on a realistic level, or at least I should say on a modest level, and hope that something greater comes of it, but trusting that that something greater is not in my hands. I accept the very real possibility and even likelihood and perhaps even like obvious fact that the words I write, even when they don't have a particular meaning to me, that somebody else could find meaning. I've seen it happen before where a song or like an image in one of our songs has had a more interesting meaning in the mind of someone who's listening than it had to me. The meaning is open, but it's a matter of relationship between every individual listener and the words. So when I hear someone, I'm listening to a Morrissey song, for example. This is one of my favorite lyricists and songwriters, so I can find meanings from the words that he's written, and it doesn't matter to me if he didn't intend that. I can say there were times that I was more convinced that I had to communicate some kind of message of a religious nature or kind of spiritual, something to try to be uplifting, and then other times I felt inadequate and unqualified to do that, so I've gone to more of a personal, confessional kind of approach where I'm just sharing my experiences and my struggles. I haven't totally abandoned the urge to try to say something helpful, you know, something that could actually build someone up or like get them through a tough time, but I also don't presume that I have the ability to do that, so it's a kind of a struggle within me that I go back and forth with. If I go really intensely in a given direction, like with thinking, for example, I'm going to really help people, I'm going to say something really uplifting and truthful and universal, and then I come to criticize that way of thinking and react, and the pendulum swings the opposite direction, and I'll all of a sudden think, well, I have nothing to say of any value to anybody, and I shouldn't even try, so that's arrogant of me. I don't feel totally confident that I'm able to communicate any kind of moral truth or uplifting messages, but I also don't want to presume that that is impossible. if there is a truth that can be communicated through music, I'm trusting that that truth is going to be able to come through if we just open ourselves up, not if we kind of try to force it to happen with any kind of personal agenda, but I can remain open as a channel or something like that. I've had these kind of ebbs and flows with a sense of peace. I can't say, for example, that I'm happier today than I was 6 years ago. I'm not. Part of that has to do with my dad dying. Part of that has to do with just the things I've been doing with my free time in the past couple months that don't feel particularly uplifting or challenging. I would be reluctant to try to say anything that would suggest that if somebody else followed my same patterns, they would find peace. I was raised in a religious context that kind of embraced Islam and Judaism mostly. And so I saw my mom, to be more specific, doing the 5 times prayer in Islam, is Salat prayer, where 5 specific times in the day you get down on your knees and down on your forehead and all that. And there were times in my life that I was more disciplined in observing that practice. And I'm not particularly disciplined with that nowadays. But I can look back at the time that I was doing that 5 times a day and say that I was generally more peaceful. Now, does that mean that I think that anybody in the world who bows down and does this particular ritual is going to feel peace? Not at all. It's a mixture of a lot of things. Some of them are as tangible as diet and exercise, keeping busy and doing something that feels productive and that's challenging me, or having some kind of a big project in life that I'm working on. Other things had to do with sort of moral integrity and living in accordance with what my moral convictions are. And when I feel like I'm living in a hypocritical way, or if I'm actually doing things that I think are harmful, that also causes my sense of peace to suffer. Pay attention to what those things are that bring you peace, and pay attention to the things that take away your peace. Have the courage to break bad cycles or destructive patterns. Don't be afraid to go against the grain, or break with your tradition, or break with your friend group if it means like trying to find something healthier and more beautiful that you can do. Listen to your conscience and ask, what should I be doing, if you don't feel a sense of solid inner stability and peace. I think it's the time that I was the happiest in recent memory. It was a time that I was, as I mentioned, more disciplined in terms of my religious practices, waking up earlier for prayers and doing more prayers throughout the day, and visiting with kind of a guru figure I had, a sheikh as they call it in Islam. Just shared a lot of really helpful perspectives on anything from my relationships to being in a band, to being in school. Somebody who was a lot older than me and a lot more experienced that could basically tell me what to do, and I listened. I was fairly obedient to this man's guidance because I trusted him, and I generally saw that whatever he told me to do worked out better than the things I wanted to do. When I think about my religious life, for example, when I'm at a time that I feel like I'm lining up with the almighty, absolute, the most high force in the world, there's something so richly meaningful about that has this eternal quality that's not, that everything comes alive and everything is important and everything is loaded with meaning and magic and significance. There's other times in my life when I just feel like the exact opposite. I look around and I just see the whole world is just a graveyard, and like a nihilism comes over me and nothing means anything, and this is all just BS, and we're all just going to die and rot. And I'd still swing back and forth between those mindsets. 6 or 8 years ago, when I feel like I was really like firing on all cylinders in terms of my spiritual determination, there was still depression mixed in there. And even now, right now, when I say like I'm at a relatively kind of dry and bland feeling season in my life, I have a lot of joys. Like I have my wife and daughter are out on tour this right now, and just looking at my daughter at any time of day is enough to give me some joy. When I think about how kind of alive do I feel, and how well do I feel like I'm spending my time, and do I feel like I'm moving, generally speaking, in a forward direction. Right now I can't really say that I am spiritually, but I'm grateful at least to be able to sense that, and hopefully to try to reverse it. I overheard the fellow who became my sheikh just speaking to others at the organization about religious issues, and he did so in a way that seemed substantially different than how I had heard anybody else talk about these things. And he wasn't afraid to say very challenging and even critical things about people in a way that I always sensed was done in love or with care and not like a condemning kind of way. He was able to tell me like, hey, you've got this thing in your life that's destructive, and you can't tell that it's destructive, but I can, and I see it very clearly. And so as I took his advice, I realized he was right. It wasn't that my life was like screaming out for the need for something like that. It was just that I kind of bumped a crossroads with this guy, and I thought it would be a worthwhile challenge to spend time with him because it would be difficult, kind of caused me to confront things about myself that I might be able in other relationships to kind of sweep under the rug. Do I feel like I'm capable of speaking truth to people? Well, 10 years ago, yeah, definitely I did. I was very eager and ready and willing to go and preach, have a Bible study after our show, or preach a sermon somehow, or like in between songs to go on and on about what this song means and how it's going to help you. This fellow laid it out for me that I really didn't know what I was talking about from experience. I was just repeating what somebody else had told me. Or I'm quoting something I read in the Bible but that I didn't fully understand. And I told him, I said, sometimes I'm afraid that people look at me like a religious fanatic. And I'll never forget his response. He said, well, you are a religious fanatic. The fact that even somebody saw me that way and had the courage to tell me that that's what he thought was really humbling. My religious quest was something that was like the source of all my goodness and righteousness. And here I was confronted for the first real time with the possibility that all my fervor and this passion for for my religion, which at the time I wouldn't have called a religion, I would have said God. I'm passionate for God. He came along and said, that's not God, that's just your idea about God. And so I've spent the subsequent years unpacking that. To what extent has my passion for whatever word you give it, if it's God or if it's religion or spirituality or morality or truth or whatever, I've been really passionate about those different ideas at different times, and I don't know how much that's fostered my growth as a human being, and as opposed to in some ways maybe inhibiting my growth. I would never presume that there was no value to those fanatical days, or some of those acts of fanaticism. Some things I said to people, like preaching to people, that strike me now as arrogant. It's presumptuous for me to think that I knew what truths were going to apply to someone else's life or what someone needed to hear. When I think of music that I go to try to find some sense of peace, to go back to our earlier topic. Most recently in my life, it's been singing from shape note hymnals, most notably a book called The Sacred Heart. There's a whole subculture of people that sing from this book, The Sacred Heart. Well, for me, that's uplifting. A lot of the lyrics are heavily religious in theme and come from a kind of church background, but a lot of people that sing Sacred Heart aren't religious at all, or Christian, or even believe in God. A lot of people feel edified or feel uplifted by just the act of singing together. And what they do with the words, or how they make meaning from this overt Christian imagery into their life, if they don't believe that those teachings are literally true, I don't know exactly what they do with that. But I have my own way of co-opting those images and using those symbols in a way that is meaningful to me, even if I don't agree with everything they're literally saying.
I wasn't supposed to be a musician, certainly wasn't supposed to be a punk musician with tattoos and stuff, And I chose to be this and worked really hard at making it happen.